Welcome back to the offensive line. We're back at it again with another episode of our second season. This season, we've been talking a lot about Christian cliches. And one of the ones that we hear that's not quite a cliche, but does represent a misunderstanding of Scripture is when Christians say, "I'm guarding my heart."
This saying comes up in the context of relationships and dating. It's not really our field of expertise, but if you want to learn more about relationships and dating, check out our friends over at Identifying God's Best. We'll include a link down below. But it is still a Christian cliche, which is why we have to talk about it.
So let's say you're talking with another Christian. You're catching up with recent events in your life when they tell you that they're interested in dating. And it's all well and good when you hear them say, "I just want to make sure I'm guarding my heart," or "I want to help her guard her heart." What does this mean? When Christians usually mean when they use this saying is something they like to call emotional boundaries.
Now, the idea of guarding your heart is biblical. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Watch over your heart with all diligence." And in other translations, it'll actually say, "Guard your heart." The writer of Proverbs, Solomon, was the wisest man to have ever lived. And if he's saying that we need to watch over our heart with all diligence, not just some diligence, but all diligence, we should pay attention.
As Christians, we need to guard our hearts. And we see the reason why in the second half of that verse, which is, "For from it flow the springs of life." We need to watch over or guard our hearts because everything we do flows out of our heart. Guarding our hearts means that we need to watch over what we're feeding our hearts, what we're dwelling on, what we're watching, what we're reading, who we're talking to, and what we're talking about.
Those are the things that feed the heart, and those are things that guide and direct our lives. See, the truth is that Christians live according to their new natures. No longer do we have a sin nature, but we were transformed completely, like it says in 2 Corinthians 5:17. But still, we need to watch what we're feeding our hearts. If we say that we're Christian, but we spend all of our free time watching Netflix or traveling or going to bars or whatever else, that is not what Paul talks about in Philippians 1:27, which is to conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, then we are not living like Christians.
It's the reason why Paul also says in that same book a little while later to dwell on whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, and whatever is commendable. These are the things you want to saturate your mind with, because whatever that is will grow. If you feed your body a bunch of junk food, you can't expect yourself to start looking like an athlete. It's the same thing. If we feed our hearts and minds with junk, our spiritual lives will reflect that. When you fill yourself up with spiritual junk food instead of the nourishing pure milk of the Word, what will happen is that you begin to develop apathy.
And when apathy sets in, it makes room for sin in your life. No Christian ever becomes apathetic overnight. What happens first is that Christians lose their wonderment and awe of God because they stop filling their minds with the things Paul says in Philippians 4. And then the result is what James says in chapter 1, 14-16. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren.
Sin begins in the mind. An individual conceives and then dwells upon the sinful action before acting upon it. That's why the heart and the mind are always linked. In order to guard our hearts, we need to do as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, and take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Guarding your heart doesn't mean emotional boundaries. And if you want to know more about that, make sure to check out Identifying God's Best.
Guarding your heart means to be careful of what you take in. It means avoiding things that lead to anger or pride or lust. If we avoid these things and instead dwell on the things in Philippians 4:8, then we will build a strong defense for our hearts. We hope that was another encouraging video for you. This episode was a little different than most of our other season 2 episodes. Nevertheless, it was still something we needed to talk about.
Like and subscribe for more videos like this. Leave a comment down below with any thoughts you may have. Make sure to check out Identifying God's Best if you want to learn all about romance and dating. We are the offensive line, and we're uncomplicating the complicated. See you next week.